I came here for shelter, but that tuning plate was hiding something.
She was 20 and broke. No room, no band, no family door left open. Just a pitch file and $11 she had kept folded inside her grandfather's repair cloth. And with that $11, she bought a brass harmonica reed room, abandoned outside Clarksdale in Coahoma County, Mississippi, where it had fallen off county maps in 1989. The north wall leaned 4 inches outward. Rain had rotted the sill beneath the back door. The county condemned it on October 3, 2022, with demolition planned for the following spring. But beneath the reed filing bench lay a tuning plate no hand had lifted in 34 years, holding money, a ledger, and the first honest account of where she came from. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Millie Shaw had been listening her whole life without knowing it. As a child in Greenwood, she could tell which screen door had closed by the pitch of its spring and whether rain would hold by the hum beneath the gutters. Other children sang with the radio. Millie waited for the breath before the first note, the human hesitation no microphone could hide. Her mother, Janice, worked mornings at a poultry office and nights balancing motel receipts near Highway 82. She loved by keeping lights paid and soup warm, but had little patience for anything that could not be entered in a ledger. Music to her was weather, welcome when gentle, dangerous when depended upon. Every other Saturday, Millie crossed town to her grandfather Amos Shaw's narrow workshop behind a tire store. Amos repaired harmonicas for church players, field hands, bluesmen, school children, and anyone carrying an instrument wrapped in a handkerchief. He kept brass reeds in pill bottles and tested notes through a rubber tube so his breath would not warm the plates too quickly. Millie learned to lift a cover plate without bending it, clear dried sugar from comb slots with sharpened pear wood, and draw a pitch file along a reed in strokes so light they barely marked the metal. At noon, they ate tomato sandwiches over the sink, while repaired harmonicas waited on a flour sack towel. Amos adjusted each gap by the width of a thumbnail shaving, then listened again. "A reed tells the truth when you stop forcing it," he told her. He meant brass, but Millie later understood that he also meant people. Pressure could make a sound louder. It could not make it clean. Amos died in February 2019 after a stroke left his right hand curled against his chest. By the time Millie reached the workshop, the landlord had cleared it. The bench, hand vise, bottles of reeds, and 3 ledgers were gone. Janice had saved only the black harmonica case with its cracked handle and Amos's name inked beneath the lining. Millie carried it into every room she rented. At 19, she joined a 2-woman blues act with Cora Bell, a singer whose voice turned heads before her smile, decided which deserved to remain turned. Cora chose the songs, clothes, and order of their names on chalkboards. She never shouted. She moved Millie's chair farther back, answered questions meant for her, and kept the cash envelope because, as she said, numbers made Millie nervous. Cora liked the silence that followed whenever she decided for both of them. On August 14, 2022, Millie returned to their room above a shuttered beauty shop and found the door open. Cora's dresses were gone. So was Amos's case. On the floor lay one brass latch, snapped at the hinge, beside a pawn ticket from Greenville for $78. The landlady stood in the hall holding Millie's canvas duffel. Janice had come after receiving a call, but she would not meet her daughter's eyes. "Take what you can carry and leave tonight." The landlady set the duffel down. Janice pressed her lips together and looked toward the stairs, as though lateness were the only danger. She did not offer the couch in Greenwood. She did not touch the latch. Millie pocketed it and left with 1 shirt, 2 pairs of socks, the pitch file, and $36. For 6 weeks, she moved in short, practical distances. In Greenville, she slept behind the bus station, beneath an overhang smelling of wet cardboard, spending $6 on crackers and water. In Cleveland, she lay under a church picnic shelter until a custodian left a blanket without speaking. Her money fell to $22 after a clinic charged for ointment where her heel had split. She rode to Batesville in a produce truck, slept in a laundromat chair while dryers turned, and woke whenever the attendant swept near her shoes. By Clarksdale, she had $14.80. 2 nights under an old feed warehouse dock reduced it to $12 and change. She learned which cafes discarded bread before rain and how long a person could sit in a library before kindness became suspicion. On the 42nd day, inside the Carnegie Public Library on Delta Avenue, Millie unfolded the local paper over a scarred oak table. A classified notice offered county seized structures for nominal deed transfer before demolition review. Most were sheds or collapsed cabins. One line read, Brass Reed Workroom, Old Sunflower Road, as is $11. Cash. Occupant assumes all hazard. She read it twice, then found the road in an atlas ending near a blue thread of drainage water west of town. The description might have meant rusted machinery under a failing roof, but Reed Workroom was language Amos would have recognized. At the circulation desk, Millie borrowed a pencil and copied the clerk's address onto the back of the pawn ticket. She spent 75 cents on a biscuit, kept $11 untouched, and began walking toward the courthouse before the library clock reached 4. By sunset, the broken latch in her pocket had warmed against her palm, and the deed office was still 3 blocks away. Millie reached the courthouse with 9 minutes left before closing, passing Abe's barbecue breathing smoke near the crossroads. The locked Delta Blues Museum, Yazoo Pass, with chairs upside down on its tables, Red's Lounge dark behind painted windows, and Wade's Barbershop with its striped pole turning in the heat. The deed office waited behind a frosted door on the 2nd floor. Her shirt clung damply between her shoulder blades. The $11 remained folded in Amos's repair cloth, separate from the coins she had allowed herself to spend. The room held 2 metal desks, a tired ceiling fan, and a brass date stamp beside a stack of tax maps. Behind the nearer desk sat a woman with a silver pencil pushed through her bun and a nameplate reading Mrs. Evelyn Pritchard, County Clerk. Mrs. Pritchard looked at Millie's shoes, then at the classified notice. You understand there is no water service? Yes, ma'am. You understand the roof has failed over the rear room? Yes, ma'am. You understand the county will not remove debris or animals? Yes, ma'am. You understand the structure may be unsafe to occupy? Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Pritchard held the paper still, as though waiting for youth to reveal itself through impatience. Then she drew out a 1-page deed, entered Millie's name in blue ink, and pressed the county seal with a brass stamp, heavy enough to shake the desk. $11. Millie unfolded the cloth. The bill had a soft crease through Andrew Jackson's face and a faint stain from machine oil. Mrs. Pritchard placed it beneath a glass paperweight and gave exact directions. West on Sunflower Avenue, left beyond the old cotton compress, then 4 miles along Old Sunflower Road until the pavement narrowed beside a drainage cut. The property stood beyond 2 walnut trees and a leaning mailbox without a door. As Millie signed, Mrs. Pritchard leaned closer. Shaw, she said. You kin to Amos Shaw? Millie's hand stopped above the final letter. He was my grandfather. The clerk removed her glasses. Without them, her eyes seemed smaller and more tired. Amos, she said, had repaired her father's marine band harmonica after the 1993 flood, when Delta mud entered every case in their house. Her father had offered payment. Amos wrote paid by weather across the invoice and handed it back. He tuned it low on the 4-draw, Mrs. Pritchard said. Daddy claimed nobody else could make that note sit right. She opened a drawer and removed a tarnished key tied to a cardboard square. It bore the parcel number and a faded pencil notation. A. Shaw Access, 1987. I always wondered why his name was there. Millie closed her fingers around the key, its cut edges pressed into her skin. The final county bus carried her west for 3 miles before turning south toward a casino route. The driver let her off beside a shuttered cotton office, and she walked until darkness gathered along the drainage ditches. A hay farmer named Mr. Tolliver stopped his truck. His left thumb ended bluntly at the first joint. He allowed her to sleep in his barn and warned her not to burrow deeply into the bales, because field mice nested near the wall. The temperature dropped to 41 degrees. Millie threaded her arms through the duffel straps and listened to cattle shifting beyond the boards. At first light, she walked the remaining 6.3 miles. Old Sunflower Road ran level between fields cut down to stubble. A man named Leon Price watched from his porch while his yellow dog Mercy followed Millie to the property line without barking. Leon raised 2 fingers. Mercy sat when the road bent beneath a pair of walnut trees. The building stood beyond them. It was roughly 18 feet wide and 32 deep, built of cypress boards weathered silver. Rusted standing seam metal covered most of the roof, though 3 rear panels had peeled upward like loosened lids. A brick chimney rose from the east wall, with 2 courses missing at the crown. Above the front door hung a narrow brass sign darkened nearly black. Millie rubbed it with her sleeve until 4 words appeared: Shaw and Mercer Reed Service. Her surname looked older there than it had on the deed. The key turned halfway and stopped. She lifted the sagging door by its iron knob, turned again, and felt the lock give. Cold air moved outward, carrying brass dust, mouse nesting, and the sweet, dry smell of old cypress. The door scraped across grit with a low note that trembled through the floorboards. Afternoon light entered through a cracked pane and settled across the front room, where shallow parts drawers covered one wall. Her palm came away black when she touched the work table. Beneath the soot, its edge had been worn pale and smooth by years of resting wrists. Tiny screws clicked under her boots. Inside the wall, a mouse worked steadily at paper. The back room was colder. Rain had drawn a dark stain from ceiling to floor, and one section of sill yielded when she pressed it with the pitch file. A bellows testing table stood against the wall, its leather split along 2 folds. Beside it waited the reed filing bench, a narrow vise, a hardened breath tube, and trays filmed with black dust. Millie set down her duffel. The impact lifted a metallic taste into the air. She heard water moving through the drainage cut behind the building, and farther away, Mercy giving one brief bark. There was no mattress. She swept a place in the front room with bundled switchgrass, folded her spare shirt beneath her head, and ate the bread heels saved from town. Night lowered through the broken roof. Cold entered under the door and moved across the boards in patient bands. Before sleeping, Millie placed Amos's broken latch beside the property key. The pieces did not match, yet moonlight gave them the same dull color. She touched her pitch file to the old workbench and drew it once across the wood, listening as the faint rasp answered through the room. Some rooms do not fall silent. They wait for the right hands. By the 3rd morning, Millie knew which plank complained beneath her left heel and which one stayed quiet if she placed her weight close to the wall. She had found the old hand pump well 26 paces behind the workroom, hidden beneath pokeweed and a collapsed sheet of tin. The first water came up brown. After 47 strokes, it cleared enough to reflect the sky. The outhouse leaned toward the drainage cut, but its floor remained sound. She scrubbed the seat with ash and boiled water in a coffee tin found beneath the porch. At night, she moved slowly through the building without a lamp, learning the floor by sound. one short creak near the door, two low notes beside the chimney, then silence around the filing bench. On the fourth day, she walked back into Clarksdale with a list written on the blank half of the county notice. Harlan's Hardware occupied a narrow brick storefront where the air smelled of rope, fertilizer, and machine oil. Its owner, Otis Harlan, had white eyebrows so long that one curled against the upper rim of his glasses. He watched Millie place the deed on the counter, then read the property description twice. That room still standing? Most of it. He removed his glasses and polished them with the bottom of his shirt. What do you need first? Millie showed him the list and explained that she had no money beyond $4.05. Otis tapped one fingernail against the counter, studying the pitch file in her pocket. Your people fix instruments? My grandfather did. Then we'll call this a credit account. I cannot promise when I'll pay. I didn't ask when. He wrote Millie Shaw on an index card and pushed a stained copy of The Homeowner's Practical Repair Manual across the counter. Bring that back when the roof stops leaking. She bought a used chimney brush for $3.25, 50 feet of quarter-inch rope for $1.80 on credit, a wire hand brush for $2.40, stove cement for $4.65, a box of 6-inch nails for $3.10, and 2 packets of lye soap at 35 cents each. Otis wrapped the brush head in brown paper so it would not tear her duffel. The chimney took the remainder of that day and most of the next. Millie tied the rope to the chimney brush, climbed the east roof slope on her hands and knees, and fed the brush down from the broken crown. Each time it lodged, she pulled it back 6 inches, turned the rope, and lowered it again. Dry creosote fell into the firebox in black scales. The heavier deposits came loose only after she worked the brush through 12 full passes. At ground level, she opened the clean-out plate and scraped the corners with a bent spoon. A dead starling lay beneath the soot, its feathers preserved gray and flat. She carried it beyond the walnut trees and covered it with field soil. 7 hours after beginning, she could see daylight through the flue, with a hand mirror angled inside the firebox. She sealed 2 gaps at the thimble with stove cement, waited overnight, then burned a twist of newspaper while standing outside. Smoke rose from the crown instead of leaking through the mortar. The first proper fire was no larger than a dinner plate. Millie fed it pencil-thin cypress splinters, then 2 dry lengths of walnut Leon Price had left beside the road. The room changed by degrees. Damp odors withdrew from the walls. The iron stove clicked as it warmed. She boiled well water for 12 minutes, added cornmeal and a pinch of salt, and ate the porridge from the same coffee tin she had used for cleaning. Heat reached her face before it reached her hands. She held the tin beneath her chin and watched smoke draw cleanly upward. Only then did she begin the workroom inventory. She cleared one surface at a time. Beneath a canvas stiff with dust lay a foot-operated bellows tester with its leather split, but its brass nozzle intact. 6 shallow drawers held reed plates sorted by key, most furred green at the edges. A watchmaker's loop rested inside a tobacco tin beside 3 ivory-handled Gap tools. There was a block of beeswax wrapped in newspaper from 1957, a pear wood comb scraper worn thin at one end, and a small hand vise bolted to the bench with square nuts. On the wall hung a tuning chart written in 2 inks. Blow notes were marked in black. Draw notes were red. Several entries carried Amos Shaw's narrow correction marks. Millie touched none of those at first. She cleaned the floor around them, lifting screws with a magnet borrowed from Otis. Under the filing bench, she found brass curls, mouse husks, and a disc of cedar, almost 12 inches across. It looked like a discarded lid, though no container stood nearby. When she struck the floor beside it with the handle of the wire brush, the plank answered solidly. The cedar disc answered hollow. She crouched and tapped again, working outward in a slow circle. The sound changed near the left bench leg. There, 4 old screws sat beneath a skin of black wax. Their heads were hand-cut, each slot slightly off-center. Millie pressed the bench. It did not shift. She placed both hands beneath the front rail and lifted. The right side rose less than half an inch. The left side remained fixed, heavier than the construction required. She removed the drawers, then the vise, then every loose tool. The bench still pulled downward at one corner. Near dusk, she found a brass tuning plate fastened beneath the work surface, wider than the reed plates used in ordinary harmonicas. 2 screws had been replaced with tapered pins. The plate was not part of the bench. It was holding something closed. Millie warmed the pins with a cloth dipped in hot water, dried them, and applied 1 drop of lamp oil to each. She waited 10 minutes. The first pin turned under the narrow edge of her pitch file. The second resisted until she tapped the file with the wooden handle of the brush. The plate came free without bending. Behind it was a shallow compartment lined with cedar. The disc on the floor had once covered the access opening, but somebody had wedged it inside before fastening the plate beneath the bench. Millie did not reach in immediately. She lit the lantern, washed her hands, and spread Amos's repair cloth across the cleared table. Then she drew out the packages one at a time. The first was wrapped in oiled linen and tied with waxed thread. Inside lay 2 reed lifters, a narrow scraper, and a German pitch file, finer than the one in her pocket. Each tool carried the same stamped mark, a small swallow above the letters S&M. The second package held raw brass reed stock in 6 careful bundles, separated by paper labels noting thicknesses from .08 to .014 inches. The edges remained bright where the wrapping had kept out air. The third object was a blue steel cash box, no larger than a loaf of bread. Its lock had already been cut. Inside, savings notes lay beneath a folded ledger. The bills were arranged by denomination and bound with cotton tape. Millie lifted each bundle, counted it twice, and wrote the totals on the back of Otis Harlan's credit card. $37,400. Below the notes sat a cloth purse holding 43 Mercury dimes, 21 Buffalo nickels, 12 Walking Liberty half dollars, and 7 Indian head cents, darkened nearly brown. A purple heart lay at the bottom, its ribbon folded around a card bearing the year 1944 and the name Thomas Mercer. Millie set the metal apart from the money. The ledger was thick, its corners rounded by hands. On the first pages were names, dates, keys, and repair notes. Some entries carried charges of 20 cents or 50. Many were marked free after flood. Boy needs school harp, church player, no cash, or paid in song. Beneath the ledger waited an envelope sealed with dark wax. Millie Shaw had been written across the front. The handwriting was not Amos's. She held the envelope near the lantern but did not break the seal. Outside, night had settled over the drainage cut, and moonlight lay in one silver path across the moving water. Millie carried the unopened letter to the back step and sat with it resting flat on both palms. She remained there until the fire went low and the workroom cooled behind her. Some rooms do not fall silent. They wait for the right hands. At first light, Millie carried the envelope to the front table and set the lantern beside it, though the room had already begun to brighten. The writing on the front leaned slightly left, each capital drawn with a second careful stroke. She had seen that hand before on the red corrections in the tuning chart. She broke the wax with Amos's pitch file. My dear one, whoever you are, my name is Ruth Mercer Shaw. If you are reading this, the room has outlasted me, and perhaps Amos too. Dr. Samuel Green at Baptist Hospital in Jackson told me in March of 1988 that the cancer had reached my liver. He said months, not years. I came home to Clarksdale because a person should finish her account where the work was done. The line began with Elijah Mercer, born in 1846 near Natchez, who learned brass work after freedom and settled in Coahoma County in 1871. His daughter Lillian Mercer, born in 1878, opened this reed room with him in 1901. Lillian's son, Thomas Mercer, born here in 1904, carried the trade to Memphis and returned in 1931. Thomas taught his daughter Ruth, born in 1927, and Ruth taught Amos Shaw, her nephew by marriage, beginning in 1954. 4 generations, from Natchez to Clarksdale, keeping small instruments alive because small instruments were what working people could carry. Tom, my father, was killed in France in August 1944 while serving with the 320th Infantry Regiment. The Purple Heart in the box came home before his body did. My mother hung his apron behind the door and left it there until the cloth turned gray. The trade closed on September 16, 1988. By then, this room had endured more than 30 years of silence between busy seasons, family quarrels, floods, and departures. Silence does not mean a craft is dead. Often it means nobody has yet agreed to begin again. If the tools are still sound, remember these things. Warm a cold reed plate in your hands before testing it, but never above 90 degrees. Clean comb slots with 1 part vinegar to 4 parts water, then dry them for a full day. File the free end to raise pitch and near the rivet to lower it. No more than 3 strokes before checking again. Set a stubborn draw reed with a gap close to the thickness of the reed itself. Then leave it 10 minutes before judging the note. The savings notes came from repairs, never from speculation. Some were mine, some were Amos's. Much came from people who paid after saying they could not. A ledger tells which instruments we repaired without charge after the floods of 1953, 1973, and 1983. Those players carried music into shelters, funerals, churches, and kitchens where watermarks still showed on the walls. Inheritance is not what sits unopened. It is what your hands agree to continue with care. Money may keep rain out. Tools may make the work possible. Neither matters if you hurry the person standing across the bench. Behind the back door, beside the southern walnut root, there is a field stone marked with the swallow stamp. Place Thomas's medal there for 1 night before deciding what honor requires. Light Lillian's testing lamp before you sleep. Its flame is small, but it was kept for honest work. The house is not empty. It has been waiting. You are welcome here. Ruth Eleanor Mercer. Shaw, September 12, 1988. Millie read the letter twice. The second time, she moved her finger beneath each name, pausing where Amos entered the lineage, not by birth, but by work. Then she folded the pages along their original creases, pressed them flat beneath her palm, and returned them to the envelope without resealing it. Behind the back door, dew had darkened the threshold. She followed the southern walnut root through a mat of leaves until it reached a field stone nearly buried at the drainage bank. Mud filled the carving, but the point of her file cleared it. A swallow with its wings swept backward, the same mark stamped into the heirloom tools. Millie laid the Purple Heart upon the stone. The ribbon stirred once in the morning wind. She left it there while the sun crossed the roof, then brought it inside before damp could reach the metal. Lillian's testing lamp stood on the highest part shelf. A squat brass vessel with a cotton wick hardened inside its cap. Millie cleaned the burner with vinegar water, threaded fresh cotton through the tube, and filled the reservoir with a little lamp oil. The first match failed. The second raised a narrow flame, blue at its base and steady above it. In that light, earlier gestures returned without asking to be remembered. The Cleveland custodian, leaving a blanket across the picnic bench. The laundromat attendant sweeping around Millie's sleeping shoes instead of waking her. Mr. Tolliver pointing out the safest hay bale. Otis Harlan opening a credit account without demanding a date. Leon Price placing dry walnut beside the road before sunrise. None of them had solved her life. Each had made the next hour possible. Before we move on, think of one small kindness someone once gave you when they had no reason to. It may have been a meal, a ride, a quiet place to sit, or simply a person choosing not to turn you away. Tell us about it in the comments. Small mercies deserve somewhere to be remembered. That night, Millie spread Amos's cloth beside her pallet and arranged the reed lifters, scraper, German file, ledger, and folded letter upon it. She set the testing lamp low enough to last until midnight. When she closed her eyes, the tools were within reach. The first snow came on December 2nd, laying 3 inches over the walnut roots and whitening the torn roof panels until every leak showed as a dark circle on the ceiling. Millie read the roofing chapter in Otis's manual 3 times, once beside the stove, once beneath the damaged rafters, and once aloud so the measurements would not blur. The roof planes measured 19 by 34 feet each. Allowing for waste, she calculated 26 bundles of 3-tab shingles, 6 rolls of 15-pound felt, and 40 pounds of galvanized nails. Otis extended the account and placed a roofing hatchet on the counter. "My brother carried this 30 years," he said. Its handle was polished nearly black. Leon Price arrived the next morning in a wool coat with tar stains at both elbows. He had roofed barns before arthritis stiffened his left hand. When Millie offered future payment, he closed her fingers around the hatchet. "Keep your money for dry walls." For 11 days they worked beneath a sky the color of stove ash. Millie sistered the split western rafter with a straight 2x8, bolting old wood to new at 16-inch intervals. Leon snapped a chalk line across the felt and taught her to drive each nail in 3 strokes. Set, sink, finish. That nail's proud. Millie leaned closer. "Pull it." She did. Wind lifted the first strip twice before they learned to weigh each end with bricks. One afternoon, sleet glazed the ladder, and they lost 2 hours sanding the rungs and warming their hands around the stove. By the following morning, Millie could judge alignment without measuring every shingle, though Leon still checked her courses from the road. They capped the ridge on December 16th. Millie climbed down after sunset and stood inside while snowmelt ticked from the eaves. Nothing struck their floor. Leon listened with her, then nodded once. January exposed what firelight had concealed. Bricks along the chimney breast were spalling into thin red shells, and the mortar beneath them powdered at the touch of a brush. Millie numbered each sound brick in chalk before easing it free, so the courses could return in their original order. Otis sold her hydraulic lime and fire clay on credit. She mixed them 3 parts lime to 1 part fire clay, adding water until the mortar held a thumbprint without shining. The old joints were raked to 3/4 of an inch, misted lightly, and packed from the back forward with a narrow pointing trowel. For 3 weeks, the temperatures remained in the 20s. Millie worked barehanded because gloves dulled her feel for the joint, and every 15 minutes, her fingers went numb. She would hold them beneath her arms, walk once around the building, then return before the mortar skinned over. A falling brick split the coffee tin she used for water. Another morning, frost formed inside the flue and delayed work until noon. She rebuilt the crown with a slight slope away from the opening and covered each new section in damp burlap so the lime would cure slowly. On January 27th, she lit a test fire with newspaper, cedar shavings, and 1 walnut stick. She watched every joint while the masonry warmed. No gray thread appeared through the wall. Outside, the smoke rose straight from the crown and drew clean toward the north. The floorboards were white pine, though soot and old oil had hidden the grain. Hand-cut rose-head nails held the planks, their faceted heads standing proud where wood had worn away. Millie set each one below the surface with a square punch, careful not to split the dry edges. Otis rented her a random orbit sander for $14 a day, She began with 80 grit, moving with the boards and stopping whenever the machine's pitch changed over a loose plank. The second pass at 120 removed the last gray cast. The third, at 220, left the pine smooth, without erasing the shallow scars made by drop tools and chair legs. Dust entered everything. Millie sealed the parts drawers with flour paste and cloth, yet still found pale powder inside her sleeves and beneath the lamp cap. She vacuumed twice, wiped the boards with a barely damp rag, then applied boiled linseed oil in 3 thin coats. Each coat was rubbed in by hand and allowed a 48-hour cure. The color deepened from dark honey toward mahogany, especially beneath the filing bench, where generations of shoes had burnished the grain. Millie left the old black crescent beside the stove, untouched. It marked where a coal scuttle had stood. One morning she woke unable to raise the sander. Her arms felt borrowed and badly fitted. She walked to the marsh instead, sat on a cold cypress root, and watched a great blue heron stand in the shallows for nearly an hour. It struck once, swallowed a silver fish, and resumed waiting. Millie did no work that day. Of the 8 windows, 3 had no glass, 4 were cracked, and 1 retained an original wavering pane dated in the old ledger to 1788, moved here from an earlier Mercer house. Millie preserved it in place, working around the bubbles trapped inside the glass. For the missing panes, Otis showed her how to cut salvage glass 1/8 inch smaller than each opening. She bedded every piece in a thin ribbon of Day P33 glazing putty, pressed glazier's points at 8-inch intervals, then rolled the outer putty into ropes and tooled each bevel with a warm knife. The sash cords had rotted into brown fiber. She replaced them with 1/4-inch cotton cord, feeding each line over the pulley and tying a figure-8 knot through the counterweight. The first weight slipped and struck the pocket hard enough to shower plaster into her hair. After that, she tested every knot twice before lowering it. Cold made the putty stiff. She kept each portion in her coat pocket until it softened beneath her palm. By the 6th window, her bevels ran straight. By the 7th, the upper sash stayed open without a stick. On the final window, she lifted the restored frame and felt the counterweights settle evenly inside the wall. Outside, a chickadee landed on a bare walnut branch close enough for her to see the small black cap above its eyes. It turned once toward the glass, then flew across the drainage cut. The walls were horsehair plaster, laid over hand-split oak lath, and most remained firm where the roof had protected them. Near the chimney, however, 3 patches failed before Millie understood how thoroughly the old surface had dried. The first slid down before supper, the second cracked overnight. The third sounded hollow when tapped. Otis brought an old feed bag containing horsehair saved from his brother's barn. Millie washed it, cut it into short fibers, and mixed it through lime plaster until each handful held together without clumping. She dampened the lath, pressed on a scratch coat, and scored it diagonally with a toothed scrap of wood. The brown coat went on 3/8 of an inch thick and cured beneath damp cloth for 72 hours. She finished with a smooth 1/8-inch layer, feathering its edges into Ruth's surviving plaster. When the last patch had set, Millie rested her palm against it. These patches will hold another 100 years. Doris Cade, who owned the cafe beside Wade's barber shop, began leaving paper bags on the doorstep every Tuesday. She wore red-framed glasses on a chain and folded the tops of the bags into perfect thirds. Inside were biscuit ends, soup in a jar, and sometimes a piece of chess pie wrapped in wax paper. Millie caught her once beside the walnut trees and offered $2. Doris pushed the money back with one flour-dusted finger. "Pay me in candles when the shop reopens." She walked away before Millie could explain that there might never be a shop. Caleb Price arrived on the blue Schwinn with a splitting maul balanced across the handlebars. He was 16, narrow-shouldered, and had a pale scar dividing his right eyebrow. Without greeting, he began breaking Leon's walnut rounds into stove lengths. Millie carried out the cash box and offered him a folded bill. He shook his head. "My mother said, about your grandfather," was all. He split wood until sunset, stacked it beneath the eaves, and rode home with the maul across his shoulders like a yoke. Reverend Boyd passed each morning on his walk toward the small church near the levee. His shoes were always polished, though red Delta mud ringed the soles. He tipped his hat whenever Millie worked outside. On the day she reglazed the final window, he stopped at the gate, lifted one hand, and gave the same four-word prayer he offered thereafter. "Keep these hands steady." He did not wait for an answer. Millie postponed the cellar until February 11th, after the chimney mortar had cured and the ground no longer held standing water. The door lay beneath a warped hatch in the back room. 7 granite steps descended to a 12 by 15-foot floor, paved in fieldstone. The air smelled of minerals and old apples. At the center stood a dressed granite slab, too regular to belong among the rough stones. A swallow had been carved into one corner. Millie cleared the dust from its edges but did not lift it. Some closures were instructions as much as obstacles. Under the third stair, her fingers touched a small oak box wedged behind the riser. The lid opened on a brass key, whose bow had been shaped into a swallow with outstretched wings. Beneath it rested a tintype dated 1903. A young woman stood outside the workroom before the walnut trees had reached the roofline. She held a reed scraper in one hand and looked directly at the camera. The face was Millie's face, made older by another century. On the back, a scratched inscription read, "Lillian Mercer, daughter of Elijah, age 25, summer of 1903. Millie carried the key upstairs and placed it on the mantel beside Thomas Mercer's medal. She tried it in the cash box, the front door, the parts drawers, and the old desk. It opened nothing she could find. There it remained. Snow withdrew from the shaded ditch in narrow strips. The creek behind the drainage cut grew loud with spring water, and green walnut catkins loosened above the repaired roof. Millie cleaned the heirloom tools but did not begin full harmonica work. She knew enough to understand what she had forgotten. That spring, she would spend 1 coin from the cash on brass stock and practice only on damaged plates that could not be made worse. She filed samples, checked them against a borrowed tuner, and recorded each error in Ruth's ledger without removing the earlier names. Some reeds rose too sharp. Others lost strength near the rivet. Millie learned to stop before impatience became damage. The house was patient. So was she. 2 winters later, on December 9th, 2024, Millie completed the first harmonica she was willing to place in another person's hands. It belonged to Reverend Boyd, a 10-hole instrument in C that had wheezed on the 6th draw since Easter. She cleaned the comb slots, flattened the reed plate on glass, and warmed the brass between her palms before testing it. 3 strokes near the free end brought the note upward. A minute adjustment to the gap cleared the choke. Reverend Boyd played 1 verse of "Guide Me, O Thou Great Jehovah" beside the stove. The final note rested in the room without trembling. He closed the harmonica in both hands. Amos would hear that. Millie did not answer. She wrote "Paid by Prayer" across the repair card. The interior had become plain and serviceable. Restored windows admitted wavering squares of morning light. The pine floor carried the dark shine of linseed oil, while the repaired plaster retained every small rise made by the old lath. Parts drawers had been cleaned and labeled. Lillian's lamp stood above the bench, and Ruth's letter remained beneath glass, where oil and breath could not reach it. The brass key stayed on the mantel until the following January, when freezing rains split a dead limb from the southern walnut. Millie and Caleb cut the limb into sections. Near the trunk, beneath a collar of bark, the saw struck metal. They cleared moss from a narrow brass plate fitted flush into the tree's old wound. At its center was a keyhole, surrounded by a swallow. The key turned once. A cylindrical compartment slid from the trunk, sealed with waxed cloth. Inside lay a folded 48-star American flag, its blue field faded almost gray, and a note written by Lillian Mercer in October 1918 while her younger brother served with American forces during the Meuse-Argonne offensive. Lillian wrote that the flag had hung above the reed bench while families waited for letters from France. She had repaired instruments without charge for soldiers passing through the rail station and for mothers who wanted familiar hymns in the evening. Her brother returned with damaged lungs and lived only 7 more years. The final lines were addressed not to a named descendant, but to whoever opened the tree. "Do not confuse survival with being spared," she had written. "We survive by giving the next person something usable." Millie refolded the flag along its old seams. She lined a cedar case with unbleached cotton and placed the flag and note inside, leaving the compartment in the walnut empty. The brass plate remained where Lillian had set it, weather turning its edges green again. On August 15, 2025, the 81st anniversary of Thomas Mercer's death, Millie carried his Purple Heart to the North Mississippi Veterans Memorial Cemetery near Kilmichael. No ceremony had been requested. Reverend Boyd accompanied her, along with Leon and Caleb. They stood before the granite marker the cemetery had approved after Millie submitted the service card and Ruth's records. She laid the medal against Thomas's name for 1 minute, then returned it to its cloth case. Honor, she had decided, did not require abandoning what had been kept. Of the money in the cedar compartment, she used 4 notes. 1 paid for roofing material. 1 bought replacement glass and sash cord. A 3rd covered brass stock, files, and a second-hand chromatic tuner. The 4th paid the cemetery fee and the cedar case for Lillian's flag. The remaining savings notes went back into the blue steel box with the coins, the ledger, and a new account of every expense. Millie sealed the cedar opening beneath the filing bench with Ruth's tuning plate. Across the fresh wax, she wrote 2 words. The next one. The workroom reopened without a sign in the newspaper. Doris pinned a white index card to the cafe corkboard beneath notices for pecans, lawn mowing, and a missing hound. Harmonicas cleaned, tuned, and repaired. Pay what the work allows. Old Sunflower Road. The first customer brought a child's plastic comb, harmonica, in a paper sack. The second mailed a rusted marine band from Helena, Arkansas. By spring, more than 40 names and addresses filled a mailing ledger kept beside the testing bellows. Millie accepted only the work she could finish carefully. Instruments waited in shallow trays marked received, resting, and ready. Those belonging to Young's players after storms were repaired without charge. On their cards she used Ruth's old notation, free after flood. Caleb returned one April afternoon carrying a plank wrapped in a bedsheet. He had grown broader through the shoulders, though the scar in his eyebrow remained pale. With a pocket knife and 2 borrowed chisels, he had carved a new sign. Shaw and Mercer, Reed Service, appeared in the same lettering as the old brass plate. Below it, in smaller letters, he had added, Daughters Millie ran her thumb through the final. There aren't any daughters, she said. Caleb held the sign against the wall and checked it with a level. Not yet. He fastened it above the front door with 4 brass screws. The old sign remained beneath it, dark and readable, carrying the names of those who had worked before either of them was born. Millie made him accept payment in the form of a repaired harmonica. She tuned it to G, slightly low on the 4-draw, the way Mrs. Pritchard remembered Amos tuning her father's instrument. By summer, Travelers sometimes stopped after seeing the sign from the road. Most found no counter, no polished showroom, and no promise of same-day service. They found a workbench, 3 chairs, a jar for repair slips, and Millie listening before she touched a screw. She never searched for Cora Bell. The pawn ticket stayed folded in Ruth's ledger, not as evidence against anyone, but as the scrap of paper that had once carried directions toward the courthouse. Amos's case was never recovered. Millie built a new one from walnut cut from the fallen limb, fitting the old broken latch into its lid. It did not lock. She preferred it that way. On the 3rd anniversary of her arrival, Millie opened a blank sheet of paper and placed it beneath Lillian's lamp. The first sentence came from Ruth, because some openings had earned the right to be repeated. "My dear one, whoever you are." She wrote that the roof held, the chimney drew, and the original pane from 1788 still bent the view of the walnut trees. She recorded where the money had been returned, which tools remained true, and how long lime plaster needed before it could be trusted. Then she added what no manual had taught her. Do not promise that repair will erase the break. A repaired thing remembers pressure, weather, and the hands that failed it. The work is to give it a clear voice without pretending it was never damaged. She signed only her name and left the date blank. The letter was not finished. There were people she had not met, techniques she had not mastered, and kindnesses not yet entered in the ledger. Near dusk, she slid the page beneath Ruth's letter and lowered the tuning plate without sealing it. Some rooms do not fall silent. They wait for the right hands. Outside, Caleb's sign moved slightly in the evening wind. The creek passed under the road with its steady brown water, and a chickadee worked along the walnut branches, where Lillian's hidden flag had rested through more than 100 seasons. Millie closed the front door but left the testing lamp burning in the window. The brass harmonica reed room waits. It has always waited. In the county clerk's office, Mrs. Pritchard had retired and another nameplate occupied her desk. The old glass paperweight remained in the bottom drawer among parcel keys that no longer opened anything. Beneath it lay the worn dollar bill Millie had paid for the deed, held flat through changes of staff, tax maps, and demolition lists. In one corner, barely visible, was a stain of machine oil.